Alright, in this video here we're going to talk about solving an absolute value equation. Now there's one little thing when you're solving an absolute value equation that you have to be aware of, and if you get that part of it, it's pretty easy to solve. If you miss that part of it, then you kind of miss half of the solutions to the equation. Right? What that thing is that you have to be aware of is when I take the absolute value of something, right, there's in this case it's the absolute value of 2x minus 5 equals 3. Right? The thing to keep in mind is I'm taking the absolute value of something and I'm getting 3. But there are two different numbers that if I take the absolute value of it, it equals 3. Right? What I mean is, if I do the absolute value of 3, that equals 3. Right? The absolute value of 3 equals 3, pretty straightforward. But if I do the absolute value of negative 3, that also equals 3. Right? So there's two different numbers that if I had them inside this absolute value, it would give me the absolute value equal to 3. Right? Which means when I'm solving an absolute value equation, I always split it up into two separate equations. Right? Whatever's inside this absolute value here, let me bring a different color out to show you this. Right, whatever's inside this absolute value, it could be 3 or it could be negative 3. Right? Either way, when I take the absolute value of it, it's going to equal that positive 3. Right? So I have to set up two different equations. I have to say that 2x minus 5 equals 3. Or I say 2x minus 5 equals negative 3. Right? Either of those two things, if 2x minus 5 equals either 3 or negative 3, when I take the absolute value, I get positive 3. Right? So when you're doing an absolute value equation, you're always splitting it into two separate equations where you're just taking whatever the number is on this side and you're setting it, you're basically taking the absolute values away and just whatever's inside there equals that number. But then also whatever's inside there equals the opposite, the negative of that number, right? And those are the two equations then you have to solve. And once you do that part, like I said, that's like the trickiest part of one of these equations. Once you do that, then in this case it's just solving a couple of pretty simple linear equations and getting your answer, right? The hard part is remembering that you have to do the two separate equations here, right? And another thing I'll point out, because I've seen a lot of students do this or make this mistake in the past, they say, well, absolute value turns everything positive. So the absolute value of 2x is 2x. The absolute value of minus 5 is plus 5. So 2x plus 5 has to equal 3. That's not right, right? Remember, the absolute value takes this entire quantity and makes it positive. It's one of those things where if you saw some of the other videos I did, like there's some things you can split apart. Like if I had the absolute value of 2 times x, that equals the absolute value of 2 times the absolute value of x, right? If I have multiplication in here, I can split apart that absolute value. If I have addition or subtraction in there, if I have the absolute value of 2 plus x, that is not equal to the absolute value of 2 plus the absolute value of x, right? That's not necessarily going to be equal. So if I have addition or subtraction here, I can't like apply the absolute value to each of these terms here individually. It doesn't work that way. Right, the absolute value kind of is like a grouping thing, kind of like a set of parentheses. Right, that 2x minus 5 that's inside that parentheses, that's grouped together, and it has to stay together until I get rid of my absolute values. Right, and the way I get rid of that absolute value is by setting whatever's inside there equal to the positive and the negative of whatever number's on the other side of that equation. All right, so again, that's the key thing for solving an absolute value equation. Not taking the absolute value of the numbers that you have inside there, but setting that entire expression that's inside there, the 2x minus 5, equal to the plus and minus of the number that's on the other side. Right? And like I said, once you get that down, once you understand that, then it's easy, because now I have to solve this equation. Okay, so I add 5 to both sides, I get 2x equals 8, I divide both sides by 2, I got x equals 4. All right, there's one of my solutions. And then I go and do the same thing on this equation. I add 5 to both sides, right? So I get 2x equals negative 3 plus 5 is 2. I divide both sides by 2, and I get x equals positive 1. And those are my solutions to that equation, right? Not hard to do as long as you do that first step correctly of separating it into the two separate equations, right? If you want to, you can check your answer. If I plug in x equals 4, 2 times 4 is 8. 8 minus 5 equals 3. The absolute value of 3 equals 3. That works. Right? If I plug in x equals 1, 2 times 1 is 2. 2 minus 5 is negative 3. And the absolute value of negative 3 equals 3. All right, so both of those solutions check out. They work. That's solving an absolute value equation. Again, if you do that first part correctly of separating it, you'll be fine. It's not too hard from there.